What if the most sacred encounter in your life wasn't one of gentle comfort, but of terrifying judgment? Before Moses commanded the Red Sea to split, before he confronted the might of an empire, he faced a terror far more ancient, far more personal. He faced God. This isn't the story of gentle whispers from heaven. This is the chilling account of a divine confrontation, where the path to destiny was paved not with peace, but with impending doom and a chilling demand for blood. Have you ever considered the true, raw power of the divine? Not just the love, but the terrifying holiness. Today, we delve into one of the most unsettling moments in biblical history, when God, the Almighty, sought to kill his chosen servant, Moses. It's a narrative that challenges our comfortable notions of faith, reminding us that sometimes the holiest missions begin not with a blessing, but with a terrifying brush with divine judgment. What hidden truths does this confrontation reveal about the nature of God, the price of destiny, and the unyielding weight of covenant? A name whispered with reverence, synonymous with liberation. But before the glory, before the miracles, there was only wilderness and a man trying to outrun his past. He was a prince of Egypt, raised in palaces of gilded splendor, destined for power. Yet his heart beat with the rhythm of his enslaved Hebrew kin. In a moment of righteous rage, he chose allegiance over ambition, striking down an Egyptian oppressor. And with that single, desperate act, Moses became a fugitive. Have you ever felt the crushing weight of a past mistake, the desperate need to simply disappear? For 40 long, silent years, Moses buried his identity, his royal dreams, his very essence, deep within the sands of Midian. He married Zipporah, a woman of the desert. He raised a child, Gershom, far from the echoes of Pharaoh's court. He became a simple shepherd, tending flocks under an indifferent sky, believing his purpose was lost. He lived quietly, perhaps even contentedly, with a vast, desolate wilderness as his only witness. He must have believed his past was forever sealed, his destiny forever changed. But the past does not stay buried, not when heaven has a plan that transcends human understanding. A divine purpose, ancient and unyielding, was waiting to erupt from the most unexpected of places. One ordinary day, under the scorching sun of Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, Moses led his flock, lost in the routine of his solitary existence. He was merely a shepherd, leading his sheep through familiar paths, oblivious to the monumental shift about to occur. Then he saw it, a sight that defied all natural law, a phenomenon that would shatter his world and redefine the very meaning of the sacred. Blazing with fire, its flames licking hungrily at the dry branches, yet miraculously, impossibly, it remained untouched, unconsumed. Imagine the chilling awe that must have gripped his heart, a spectacle of pure, raw energy, radiating power, yet utterly gentle in its non-destruction. It was a sign, not of annihilation, but of an unimaginable, terrifying presence. As he drew closer, compelled by an invisible, irresistible force, the very air around him grew thick with an ancient, holy electricity. The crackle of the unconsuming fire, unnaturally steady, seemed to thrum with an unseen power, a sound utterly unlike any earthly flame. Then, cutting through the awe-filled silence, came the voice. Not merely sound, but a force that vibrated through his very bones, a resonance that echoed the dawn of creation itself. It was the voice of ultimate authority, calling him by name. His own voice, a mere whisper against the vastness of the desert, trembled. The voice, stern, yet with an underlying power that demanded absolute attention, delivered its chilling command. "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals. The place where you are standing is holy ground." In that moment, Moses understood. He was no longer just a shepherd. He was on the threshold of the divine. Stripped of his common coverings, humbled before an unseen majesty, he stood barefoot on earth, consecrated by the touch of the Almighty. The very air around him hummed with an ancient power that both terrified and compelled. Then the full revelation, heavy with the weight of generations. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The staggering truth. The God of his ancestors, the God of the covenant, had remembered his people. God spoke of Israel's agonizing suffering in Egypt, the ceaseless cries of his enslaved children echoing through the heavens, a lament that had finally reached the divine ear. He spoke of their imminent deliverance, of a mighty hand that would bring them out of bondage, not through human strength, but through his own irresistible power. And then the terrifying weight of the mission fell upon Moses' shoulders. He, the fugitive, the forgotten shepherd, was to be the deliverer. He, Moses, was the chosen one. The call was clear, undeniable. But for Moses, it was also paralyzing. How often do we feel utterly inadequate when faced with a task that seems too vast, too impossible for our frail hands? Moses, already humbled by decades of exile, felt the full crushing weight of this divine mandate. His first question wasn't about strategy, but about his own profound unworthiness, his perceived inability to fulfill such an immense calling. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Who am I, a murderer, a forgotten shepherd, to stand before the most powerful ruler on earth, to challenge an empire? The answer came, simple yet absolute. I will be with you. A promise of unwavering divine presence, yet it brought little comfort to a man wrestling with his own perceived limitations, his deep-seated fears. He continued to argue, to plead, to find any escape from this terrifying destiny that had suddenly burst into his quiet life. What if they don't believe me? What if my own people, those I abandoned, those who know my past failures, reject my claims of divine appointment, seeing only the fugitive, not the prophet? Then the divine challenge, sharp and direct, cutting through his excuses. What is that in your hand? In an instant, the humble shepherd's staff, his constant companion in the wilderness, transformed. It writhed and twisted, a venomous serpent, a terrifying demonstration of divine power. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it reverted to wood. His hand, plunged into his cloak, emerged leprous, white and scaled, a visible sign of defilement. Then, just as swiftly, restored to health. Miracles, raw and undeniable, displayed before his very eyes. Yet still Moses resisted, his fear greater than his awe, his self-doubt a heavy shroud. He appealed to his perceived flaws, hoping God would relent. I am slow of speech, I'm not eloquent, my words are clumsy, my tongue heavy. How can I possibly articulate your mighty decrees before a powerful, articulate king? The voice of God, now stern, with growing intensity, cut through his last remaining arguments. Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Go, I will help you speak. I will be with your mouth and teach you what to say. Every word, every pronouncement will be my own. But Moses, desperate, almost a whimper, made one final plea, a plea for avoidance. Please send someone else, anyone else. And in that final, desperate refusal, a terrifying shift occurred. The patience of the Almighty, boundless as it may seem, began to wane. The anger of the Lord burned against Moses. It was a divine wrath born not of malice, but of frustrated purpose, of a will defied. This holy indignation underscored a profound truth. God's call is not a suggestion, it is a command. Still, in his infinite mercy, even amidst his anger, God relented in one aspect. giving him Aaron, his eloquent brother, as a mouthpiece. But the message was clear, delivered with an unspoken weight that pressed upon Moses' very soul. There are no excuses in the face of divine command. The call of God demands absolute, unwavering obedience. And so, with the weight of that profound, terrifying divine encounter pressing heavily upon him, Moses obeyed. He gathered his meager possessions, a new staff now imbued with incredible, terrifying power, and his family. His wife, Zipporah, courageous and resilient, now faced a future she could barely comprehend. His two sons, Gershom and Eleazar, innocent of the monumental journey upon which their father was embarking, played around the camels. He loaded them onto the beasts, their small caravan a stark contrast to the grand procession he would eventually lead. With a heavy heart and a spirit both terrified and resolved, he turned his back on the quiet life he had built, a life of anonymity he had sought, and headed toward Egypt, toward the looming confrontation with Pharaoh, toward the destiny he had so desperately tried to avoid. But as they journeyed through the desolate landscape, a chilling premonition settled over Moses, a sense that something was deeply, terribly wrong. The air grew heavy, the silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken dread. It was as if the very wilderness held its breath, waiting for an unseen, impending terror. Along the long, solitary road, as night began to fall, they sought refuge at a lodging place, a simple, unassuming stop, a moment of presumed respite before the trials ahead. But there, in the deceptive quiet of that night, as the stars wheeled overhead, the impossible happened. The Lord met Moses and sought to kill him. This wasn't a test. This wasn't a warning. This was a direct, terrifying assault from the very God who had just called him to a mission of liberation. Imagine the utter shock, the horrifying paradox. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of compassion and promise, suddenly transformed into an adversary, a force of destructive, unyielding judgment. Moses' body convulsed, racked by an invisible agony. His breath left him in ragged, desperate gasps. A crushing weight descended upon his chest, as if the very sky itself had collapsed to suffocate him, pressing him into the dusty earth. He writhed on the ground, silent, paralyzed, his eyes wide with a terror beyond words, fully aware of the swift, inevitable grip of death. The air crackled, not with the fire of the bush, but with an unseen righteous fury. The wind howled, a mournful dirge for a life about to be extinguished. What was this? Why was this happening? Why would the God who just empowered him now seek his demise? Panic surely gripped Zipporah, watching her husband, the man who spoke with God, dying before her eyes. What thoughts raced through her mind? Fear, confusion, then perhaps a flash of ancient wisdom, a memory of the foundational commands of their people. In a flash of divine insight, a chilling realization struck her. She understood. Their son, Gershom, had not been circumcised. The ancient, sacred covenant, the mark of Abraham's lineage, the sign of belonging to God's chosen people, had been neglected. This vital command, predating even the law from Sinai, had been bypassed in their hurried flight, or perhaps in Moses' long years of trying to forget his Hebrew roots. This was the reason for God's terrifying wrath, a direct violation of a fundamental, non-negotiable promise. This wasn't about Moses' eloquence or his leadership, it was about the foundational agreement. In a desperate act of terrifying resolve, Zipporah seized a sharp stone, a flint sharp and unyielding from the harsh desert ground. With trembling yet determined hands, she performed the grim, life-saving ritual. She circumcised their son. Blood, sacred and startling against the desert dust, dripped onto the dry earth. It was a sacrifice, brutal and immediate, made to appease an unyielding divine will, a payment for a forgotten obligation. The child wailed, a sound of innocent pain piercing the horrific silence, a testament to the urgency of the moment. She took the bloody foreskin, still warm, still raw, and in a gesture both shocking and symbolic, touched it to Moses' feet. "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me," she spat, her words a mixture of accusation, relief, and deep, primal understanding. And just like that, the Lord let him go. The invisible, crushing weight lifted. The terrifying grasp loosened. The sudden assault ceased as abruptly as it began. Moses, gasping for air, lay in the dust, but profoundly, irrevocably changed. He had stared into the eyes of judgment, not in the public arena of Egypt, not before the arrogant defiance of Pharaoh, but in the most intimate, vulnerable setting imaginable. In the quiet, with no witnesses, no earthly mercy, he had faced the unyielding standard of God's covenant. The terror was not in the theatrics of a burning bush, but in the silent, swift, and absolute demand for obedience to the covenant. He had witnessed the horrifying truth. God's holiness is not just a concept. It is an active, consuming fire that demands adherence to his decrees, no matter the stature of the individual. God had chosen him for the greatest mission in history, to liberate an entire nation from slavery. But the covenant, the foundational promise upon which this mission rested, could not be bypassed, not even by the chosen. This terrifying encounter revealed a profound truth: the seriousness of God's commands. Disobedience, even unintentional, even delayed, carries a price, a consequence that can be devastating. This brush with death was not merely a warning. It was a purification, a terrifying forge that stripped away any remaining complacency, any shred of self-reliance, any assumption that his calling exempted him from the basics of faith. Moses rose, weakened by the ordeal, humbled to his core. Every ragged breath was a reminder of the night God nearly took his life for a neglected command. Behind him, Zipporah held their crying child, silent, her own terror slowly subsiding, replaced by a fierce, primal resolve. They were a family marked by blood, forever bound by that terrifying night. Before him lay Egypt, a land of tyranny, a river destined to run red with blood, a vast sea waiting to be split. But Moses would not forget the chilling lesson of that night. He would not forget the raw, unyielding nature of the divine covenant. For disobedience, for the blood not shed, he now understood that the true battle for Israel's liberation began not in Egypt, but in the heart of God's chosen leader, secured by blood and absolute obedience to God's unchanging law. Sometimes the holiest missions, the greatest callings, begin not with fanfare, but in horror. Not with a gentle blessing, but with a terrifying brush with divine judgment. The God who sends is also the God who sanctifies. The God who calls is the God who demands faithfulness above all else. And the covenant, the sacred bond between humanity and the Almighty, is indeed sealed in blood. It is a powerful, unnerving reminder that God's ways are higher than our ways, and His holiness demands profound reverence and absolute obedience. What does this chilling moment reveal about your own walk of faith? Have you ever overlooked a divine command, a seemingly small detail of obedience, believing it insignificant in the grand scheme of your life or your calling? This story reminds us that every detail of God's covenant matters, and that true spiritual power flows from humble adherence. If this deep dive into one of the Bible's most unsettling mysteries sparked a new understanding or challenged your perspective, please share it. Spread this message to someone who needs to hear about the profound and sometimes terrifying nature of divine encounters. The God who sends is also the God who sanctifies. The God who calls is the God who demands faithfulness above all else. And the covenant, the sacred bond between humanity and the Almighty, is indeed sealed in blood. It is a powerful, unnerving reminder that God's ways are higher than our ways, and His holiness demands profound reverence and absolute obedience. What does this chilling moment reveal about your own walk of faith? Have you ever overlooked a divine command,
a seemingly small detail of obedience, believing it insignificant in the grand scheme of your life or your calling? This story reminds us that every detail of God's covenant matters, and that true spiritual power flows from humble adherence. If this deep dive into one of the Bible's most unsettling mysteries sparked a new understanding or challenged your perspective, please share it. Spread this message to someone who needs to hear about the profound and sometimes terrifying nature of divine encounters.
And if you want to explore more challenging, captivating stories from the biblical narrative, stories that confront us with uncomfortable truths and enduring lessons, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Join our community as we uncover the astonishing depth of ancient scriptures week after week. Remember, the journey of faith is rarely straightforward, often challenging, but always transformative. See you in the next video.